Of course, while they were there, they frequently helped themselves to what they wanted, including the home itself. We fought a revolution. We won the revolution. We wrote a constitution. But before we wrote it, we had an argument. The argument was in Philadelphia in 1787, where it was hotter than it is here in Galveston today. And the argument was this: where do our freedoms come from? There was, even in Philadelphia in 1787, a big government crowd. You know their names. Alexander Hamilton, John Adams. These guys argued that our freedoms come from the government. That the government is the one that says we can speak freely and travel freely and worship as we wish. And as long as the government says that, and the government is compelled to say that, we're safe. Jefferson, who wasn't there, but Madison, who was, made the argument that our freedoms come from our humanity, not from the government. That as God created us in his image and likeness, freedom is our birthright. It is as natural to us as the fingers on the ends of our hands or the nose in the middle of our face. The argument that freedom is our birthright was not a new one. Jefferson had made the same argument 12 years earlier when he wrote in the Declaration of Independence that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among these is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When he wrote that, and when every single delegate to the Constitutional Congress pledged their lives, fortunes, and sacred honors to support that, he wedded the American soul to the concept of natural rights. That, our right to think as we wish, to say what we think, to publish what we say, the right to worship as we see fit, the right to protect ourselves even against the government. Just as an aside, you know what that means? That means if the state of Texas or the state of New Hampshire authorizes you to carry a gun, you can carry that gun no matter who walks into that room. I don't even know that kid's name, but he's a new American hero. Back to the litany of rights. The most unique American right after the right to life is the right to be left alone. Thus, the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution says the government can't write its own search warrants, can't knock on your door, can't break it down, can't arrest you, can't take your property, can't look at your personal papers, effects, or things, unless they present real evidence of real crime to a judge. So the Constitution puts a neutral judge between the government and the government's target. No matter how guilty is the target, no matter how threatening is the target, no matter how feared is the target, no matter how widespread is the belief in the guilt of the target, any government and every government that wants to get to that target must first go to a judge and present evidence of probable cause. That's what the law used to be. Until a president from the Lone Star State persuaded the supposedly freedom-loving Republican Party that it could do away with the Fourth Amendment. Remember the Writs of Assistance Act? We fought against a king when his soldiers knocked on our doors with self-written search warrants. The most abominable piece of legislation since the Alien and Sedition Acts, which made it a crime to criticize everybody in the government but the vice president, because the vice president was Thomas Jefferson, who welcomed their criticism. But the most abominable piece of contemporary legislation is the Patriot Act. You think that the Fourth Amendment protects you? Look again, the Patriot Act lets federal agents write their own search warrants. And the Patriot Act makes it a felony for the recipient of those search warrants to tell anyone. Let me get this straight. What part of Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech? What part of the people shall be secure in their persons, places, houses, and things does the Congress not understand? The Bush administration prosecuted an 86-year-old librarian because an FBI served her with a self-written search warrant to find out who had borrowed books from a public library, and she told her 74-year-old assistant. So they prosecuted her for speaking. They have made it a crime to tell the truth. Question in an open courtroom to the 86-year-old lady under oath. Did you receive a self-written search warrant? If she answers yes and tells the truth, she goes to jail for 5 years for speaking the truth. That's the nature, the insidious nature, the damnable nature of this piece of legislation that the Congress has imposed on us, and which regrettably, my dear friends, is still the law today. None of them read it. I spoke to a group of members of Congress in another state, not far from here. I don't even want to tell you who it is. And some of them came up to me afterwards and said, well, we voted for this thing, but we didn't know that it let federal agents write their own search warrants or that it made a crime for people to tell anyone. So I asked the question that you all know the answer to. Did you read it? No, of course not. In the case of the Patriot Act, they actually have an excuse for not reading it, because the Republican leadership in the House took this 315-page piece of legislation, which I have read 3 times and which takes 20 hours to read, and put it on the House intranet, the internal internet for House members and their senior staff, for 15 minutes before it was time to vote. And the Attorney General told the House of Representatives there's a terrorist behind every bed bug and under every tree and next to every toilet, and we have to can't worry about these fine points of the Constitution. We need these powers to go after these people now. There have been 6 prosecutions under the Patriot Act. 3 have been for pornography, 2 have been for corruption, and 1 was the old librarian from Bridgeport. Has any of that made you safe? Of course not. But it has made you less free. Now, this did not start with George W. Bush. It started with John Adams, the Alien and Sedition Act. Think about it, the very same generation, and in many cases the very same human beings that wrote, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech, just 9 years later enacted legislation that authorized the punishment of speech. Jefferson allowed the statute to expire, but human beings were put in real jails hotter than this room we're in today because they dared to criticize the president. And several of them were put in jails for criticizing the president's enormous waistline. When Jefferson was president, he caused the Congress to enact legislation which purported to pay them back for their time in jail.